Welcome to the Deep Dive. Tonight, we're tackling a situation that is just constantly shifting, really demands our attention right now. Picture this. 16 minutes into these late-night meetings in Doha, reports come in. The sky cracks. An alleged Israeli strike hits a site where Hamas figures were apparently convening. This happens right in Doha, the capital of the country, mediating the Gaza ceasefire talks. It's a pretty dramatic moment. Captures the pressure building across the whole Middle East. Okay, let's try and unpack this. Our mission tonight. Connect the dots. The Gaza war and this wider regional spillover. What actually changed this week? What does it all mean? And crucially, what should we be watching next? We want to give you a clear, well-sourced, balanced roadmap. Look at the stakes for people on the ground, yes, but also for the global economy, for international relations.
Exactly. And moments like these, they really underscore how quickly events can just cascade, can spiral. What's really striking, I think, is how these shifts, they don't just stay local, do they? They ripple out, they touch negotiations, regional stability, even, global systems we rely on. The conflict's fault lines, they're not just spreading, they seem to be multiplying. And diplomacy is just scrambling to keep up, often really struggling to contain the fallout.
Absolutely. And, to really get where we are now, it's worth just quickly reminding ourselves how we got here. As our listeners know, this war began after Hamas's devastating attacks on October 7th, 2023. Around 1,200 people killed in Israel, mass hostage-taking. Israel's response, as we followed, has been this extended air and ground campaign, the stated aim, dismantling Hamas. But the operation has had a truly devastating impact across Gaza.
And now, nearly 2 years on, the humanitarian picture is, frankly, dire. UN coordinators are telling us Gaza's Ministry of Health reports tens of thousands of Palestinian fatalities since the war began, well over 100,000 injured. And displacement. It's reached just extraordinary levels. Humanitarian officials estimate something like 9 out of 10 Gazans. That's out of 2.1 million people forced to move at least once. And this churn, it just continues. Tens of thousands of new displacements recorded just in recent weeks amid renewed fighting.
Those numbers are just staggering. When you talk about that level of personal trauma, families split apart, hospitals struggling for fuel, for medicine, equipment, entire neighborhoods just gone. It really makes you wonder, what leverage does the international community actually have? Israel states it targets militants embedded among civilians, but...
Right, but Palestinian and international organizations, they keep documenting this extensive civilian harm, this infrastructure collapse. It's unavoidable. And given how dire things are on the ground, it really raises the question, how much impact are these ongoing legal efforts actually having? Like the case at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ South Africa filed that case alleging genocide. And while the court has issued provisional measures, these are basically interim orders stressing civilian protection, humanitarian aid flow. Whether those measures are truly changing facts on the ground, that remains, highly contested, a huge source of debate.
Okay, so with that as the backdrop, let's zoom right in on this past week, because it brought some really significant inflection points, things that could genuinely alter the trajectory here. The Doha strike, as we said, is the big headline. Qatar, alongside Egypt and the U.S., they've been the primary mediators in these incredibly sensitive talks. Ceasefire, hostage release. From your perspective, what are the sort of practical hurdles that strike throws up for the negotiators? How do they keep these complex talks from just completely unraveling now?
That's exactly the challenge. I mean, this strike, it doesn't just fray trust, although it certainly does that. It forces Qatar into an untenable position. It potentially weakens its ability to even host future talks. It might inadvertently push Doha to reconsider its whole mediation role, and that effectively shrinks the diplomatic playing field right when we need it most. Now, Qatar's leaders, they quickly condemned it. Breach of sovereignty, they said their mediation won't be deterred. But the political costs for them, domestically, regionally, they've clearly shot up. Israel, meanwhile, framed it as a response to recent attacks. The White House acknowledged they were notified beforehand, but sought to distance itself from the actual decision.
And the ripple effect is just immense, isn't it? Hostage families back in Israel expressing deep fear that diplomacy just got that much harder. Hamas has vowed retaliation. Each of these threads just tightens the knot around any potential negotiations. It complicates any framework trying to sequence things like a ceasefire, prisoner exchanges, phased Israeli withdrawals, guarantees for border security, scaling up aid. It's incredibly delicate. And this strike just piled on more pressure. But the real danger, the one that keeps regional strategists up at night, is how Gaza's conflict isn't staying contained. It's not just a localized crisis anymore. Its tendrils are reaching out, igniting flashpoints across the Middle East. Let's trace these expanding fault lines. Maybe start north, Lebanon. That's a real tinderbox. Cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah. It's been this constant ebb and flow for months now. In early September, the UN peacekeeping mission there, UNIFIL, they reported Israeli drones dropping grenades near peacekeepers who were clearing roadblocks near the blue line. That's the demarcation line. UNIFIL called it one of the most serious incidents since last year's cessation of hostilities arrangement.
Yeah, that specific incident near the blue line, it really highlights just how unforgiving the risk calculus is along that border. A single misfire, a misread signal in this volatile environment, it could easily tip into a broader war. It might be a conflict neither side genuinely wants, but you can be sure both are preparing for it. And then you have the internal Lebanese politics. The cabinet publicly backed an army plan to address Hezbollah's weapons, but, crucially, without a timeline. Hezbollah, in turn, framed moves like that as serving Israeli interests. They insist on Israeli withdrawals from contested border hills before any discussion. It's a classic standoff, domestic politics constantly bumping up against regional dynamics.
And then there's Syria, often called the shadow battleground, right? Another critical area feeling these tremors. Israel has intensified strikes there, targeting what it describes as Iranian weapons flows, militias linked to Tehran. Late August, there were reported Israeli incursions near a former air defense base southwest of Damascus. Earlier months saw raids on alleged missile and drone production sites, stockpiles. Damascus naturally decries these attacks. Violations of sovereignty, they report casualties among their forces too.
And Syria, of course, it serves as this crucial connective tissue for Iran's regional network. Israel's consistent strikes there, they're not just about tactical disruption. It's a strategic attempt to choke off supply lines, reduce threats. Part of what's called the campaign between wars, this doctrine of proactive, low-intensity military ops designed to disrupt and deter before a bigger conflict erupts. But, and this is the key risk, every single strike there carries this inherent danger of regional escalation. It's a constant high-stakes balancing act. It could easily detonate if, say, a strike hits a senior figure from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. That risks direct Iranian retaliation, moving beyond just proxy channels.
Moving eastward now, Iraq also feels these tremors, these wider fault lines. Armed groups aligned with Iran have, at times, targeted U.S. positions, logistics, prompting American, and sometimes reported Israeli, responses. Baghdad finds itself in such a difficult position, trying to balance nationalist politics, security sector reform, and this immense pressure from both Washington and Tehran.
Exactly. And while Iraq is perhaps quieter now than during the peak escalations we saw late last year or early 2024, the potential for a sharp uptick, it definitely persists. Especially if the Gaza talks collapse completely, or if that Lebanon situation spirals out of control. It's just a stark reminder that even seemingly contained conflicts can reignite distant embers.
And then we have the maritime pressure point, Yemen and the Red Sea, a truly global choke point.
Yemen's Houthi movement continues to threaten international shipping. They've claimed recent attacks in the northern Red Sea near the big Saudi port of Yanbu even. Since late 2023, they've launched drones, missiles, targeting vessels they link, sometimes accurately, sometimes not, to Israel or its partners. Tragically, a small number of ships have sunk, mariners have died, insurance and freight costs have just surged, and navies have been forced to reroute traffic all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds significant time, significant cost pressure to global trade.
It's a massive disruption. Even when ships aren't hit, just the near misses, the reports of persistent electronic interference. It really shakes maritime confidence. The Houthians say their campaign is solidarity with Gaza. Critics call it coercive piracy that punishes global commerce, regional economies. It's just a huge disruption for anyone involved in global trade.
Right.
Affects supply chains from, Shanghai to Southampton.
And placing this in a broader context, it's so clear the conflict's ripples extend far beyond the region itself. We're seeing impacts on energy prices, sure, but also defense supply chains, even the literal internet backbone. In the Red Sea, for example, those damaged undersea cables, some analyses suggest they were likely cut by an anchor dragged during attacks. They produced significant outages. It highlights how conflict zones can intersect with vital digital infrastructure, stuff we often take for granted until it fails. For multinational companies, Middle East risk used to primarily mean oil prices. Now, it also encompasses data routes, maritime insurance premiums, increased scrutiny on export controls, dual-use tech. It's much broader.
So, with all these incredibly complex, interconnected moving parts, how is diplomacy trying to cope? It sounds like an impossible juggling act, trying to fight the immediate crisis while also somehow building for the future.
It absolutely is. It's exactly that. On the crisis side, Qatar has affirmed it will keep mediating despite the Doha strike. Egypt maintains crucial back channels. The U.S. is performing this balancing act, supporting Israel while pressuring them to limit civilian harm and pursue a hostage ceasefire deal. European states, meanwhile, they push for humanitarian access, accountability, even as their own positions differ on things like arms sales or state recognition moves. And the United Nations, predictably, is pleading for sustained aid corridors, deconfliction mechanisms, often feeling like a lonely voice in the wilderness.
Right. And on the legal track, as we touched on that ICJ genocide case,
Mm.
it just proceeds slowly. Measured in legal filings and court orders, not immediate battlefield effects. Separately, you have rights bodies, investigators meticulously collecting records for potential future proceedings, and those could carry significant weight down the line.
Mhm. Though for Israelis and Palestinians caught in the daily peril, these legal debates often feel quite distant. Yet these rulings, these investigations, they do shape international legitimacy over time. They influence sanctions debates, define diplomatic space in ways that can be hugely consequential long term. It's just this stark contrast, isn't it? The slow grind of justice versus the brutal speed of daily events.
Okay, given this incredibly complex web,
Mm.
what should you be watching next? Here's what we're keeping a close eye on as these dynamics keep unfolding. First, obviously, the Doha aftermath. Do the mediators manage to salvage some kind of text? A phased ceasefire, hostage release? Or does this new mistrust just stall everything? We need to watch for shuttle diplomacy, maybe potential new guarantors popping up, or maybe creative sequencing like third-party monitoring, incremental prisoner swaps, time-bound humanitarian truces, anything to rebuild momentum.
Then there's the Lebanon threshold. It just feels perpetually on the brink, doesn't it? UNIFIL's mandate was just renewed. Any serious attack on peacekeepers, or God forbid, a mass casualty incident across the blue line, that could force external powers to step in, either diplomatically or perhaps more directly. Similarly, in that Syrian corridor, continued Israeli strikes on Syrian bases, logistics nodes, it signals this urgency to curb Iranian supply lines. But as we said, any large-scale strike hitting a senior IRGC figure, that risks direct Iranian retaliation beyond the usual proxies. And that could fundamentally change the whole regional equation overnight.
And we absolutely cannot take our eyes off the Red Sea. If Houthi attacks broaden, become more lethal, expect tighter naval coalitions, definitely higher war risk premiums for shipping, and longer detours, which means, for you, potentially pricier goods and more schedule shocks globally. On the ground in Gaza itself, humanitarian access remains critical. Aid groups will just keep pushing. Predictable, large-scale entry points, fuel for hospitals, for bakeries, safety guarantees. If access improves, civilian suffering might ease slightly. If not, well, famine alerts, disease outbreaks could worsen significantly, an even more profound crisis.
And finally, we have to watch the interconnected legal and political constraints. Those ICJ orders, domestic politics in Israel, internal Palestinian dynamics, even things like U.S. electoral cycles, they all continue to shape the timing, the terms of any potential deal, adding layers of domestic and international pressure to an already incredibly volatile mix.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us? We've seen firsthand, haven't we, how wars create these powerful shockwaves, and how diplomacy is constantly trying to absorb them, trying to prevent a regional earthquake. In Gaza, the imperative seems clear, if incredibly difficult. Protect civilians, free hostages, and somehow start building scaffolding for a political horizon, however narrow it might seem now, just to prevent the next spiral of violence. And in the wider Middle East, the objective is equally stark, equally urgent. Prevent stumbling into a regional war that nobody, absolutely nobody, can truly afford.
These ongoing challenges, they just underscore the critical role of understanding not just the events themselves, but this intricate web. The actors, the interests, the vulnerabilities, they all define our world today. It really is a dynamic, interconnected system where, as we've seen, a single spark can potentially ignite a much, much larger blaze.
Exactly. So given all these interconnected fault lines, we've explored everything from diplomatic trust eroding in Doha to those damaged undersea internet cables in the Red Sea. Here's something to think about. What aspect of this deep dive do you think will have the most unexpected impact on global events in the coming months? That's a question for all of us to consider, to keep exploring. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay informed and stay curious.